By now, I imagine a lot of you guys have already seen this, but a very, very, very common question. Obviously, what are my thoughts on this? I already recorded a different video on this. I'm re recording it now because of what happened on the PTR. I do not want to publish that video because it seems like it is mostly incomplete and a lot of my assumptions were not correct, partially because of maybe the wording in the post that wasn't obvious. So let's go ahead and read through this all, and then I will give you my opinion on it. Try to give the same opinion on things that are still the same. Over the course of War Within Season 1, the development team has received extensive feedback on Mythic Dungeons, much of which was revolved around frustrations, especially in trying to progress through the system, primarily in pickup groups. It's good. It's good to hear that It's good to hear that said out loud, because it means that they are actually caring about PuGs, which for many years it seemed like they did not. Okay, so this is a good thing. This is a good thing. It's just unfortunately, I don't know that it's going in the right direction in for some of the reasons. But regardless, it's good to hear them say that. Common areas of criticism have included the sense that players were faced with too many mechanics at once. The failure was too punishing. The rewards felt insufficient for the challenge and effort required, and that it could be hard for many players to find groups as the community gravitated towards meta specs to help cope with these difficulties. Okay, so let's break all of these things down. First of all, if you said all of these things, you just are not trying. Like, if any one person gave all of these things as feedback and criticism of the system, then you just suck. Like, you can't say all of these things. It's ridiculous, okay? But they're all valid on their own. So let's look at each of them. Common areas of criticism include the sense of players are faced with too many mechanics at once. That's called Mythic Plus. I mean, I'm sorry, that's just how it works. This is a dungeon, not a raid. There's not just going to be one mechanic to deal with on every trash pack. But if you get to be appropriately geared and knowledgeable, that's kind of how it proliferates. You kind of come down to what is the actual hard part of this trash, and everything else kind of gets ignored. That's how the game works. So dealing with too many mechanics at once is either a strategy failure on your part, like you're pulling too many things together that are causing these overlaps of mechanics, or you are not experienced enough with the dungeon. Like, this is not a complaint of the system. This is a complaint of your lack of preparation. Okay. Failure was too punishing. 100% agree. The double death penalty thing that we've been talking about, and the changes they made in these seasons, horrendous. Horrendous idea. It was a bad idea from the PTR. It was, or the beta. Like, I should have, maybe spoken out more, but I don't know. But like, people were demanding, and I think maybe the big takeaway here is that anybody who thought you were going to get no fixes and the dungeons were going to get easier, you were just lying to yourself. I try to warn people about this, but I think a lot of people thought that, hey, removing affixes will make the game easier. It didn't. It did the complete opposite. Now, it's not only that caused that, but yeah, obviously, and we just talked about this on the stream today as well, about how if there's no tank breakers, then all of a sudden everything's tuned to be hard on its own, because they're not just going to allow the tank to just sit there and be a total limp noodle. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to actually be a potent player as a tank. So if the challenge doesn't come through tank breakers, then that means it's going to come through regular stuff like rotational casts and potential melees. It's going to get worse, But anyway, the final one is, the third one is rewards felt insufficient for the challenge and effort required. This one, I think, is a mismatch of expectations with the development of the game and the player base. I think a lot of people were only looking at Mythic Plus as a tool to give them loot or potential crests. And I get why people would do that. I mean, that's been a very long-standing trend in video game, really probably every video game that has a reward system. But unfortunately, the system's not about that. It's about the progression. It's about the long-term progression and the potential skill required to climb the ladder. So if you're literally only in there to get rewards, you're kind of just doing it wrong. But Blizzard does support that, so I can see why they would want to address that as well. And then it could be hard for many players to find groups as the community gravitated towards meta specs. This is not going to go away. Everything I read in this post is not going to change that. So them bringing it up and saying, we hear you, it's like, you can't. Like, this is the community doing this. It's not the game. Blizzard's not telling people to do that. So there's no way for them to fix that problem, unfortunately. Anyway, we have already approached our Season 2 dungeon rollout on the PTR and ongoing tuning with an eye towards addressing mechanical issues. Cast time on critical enemy spells have been significantly increased, and I can vouch for this. Even again, it seems like they changed it. We just did Operation Floodgate, and it seems like they've even made some of those casts even longer since the last time we tested it. This is definitely a notable change, but I would not say it's like gigantic. Like, I think when they say significantly increased, they might be saying, it's hard to understand Blizzard's like words at times. It's a 25% increase, right? Meaning it went from 2 to 3 seconds. Like, okay, yeah, that helps, especially if you're, dealing with many things overlapping. But like, it's not like you're sitting there for 6 seconds waiting for a cast to go off like that. It's still fast paced. You still have to know what you're doing, and you still have to be aware of the mechanical problems on each pack. Anyway, tank damage spikes reduced in magnitude and are given better telegraphs. It does feel like tanking is the easiest it's been in a long time in this PTR testing cycle. I feel like I am totally, like, I don't know, like we die, like 4 or 5 deaths to pack. I'm sitting there soloing it. People get back. Like, it's not any harder than it's ever been. And if anything, I would say it's easier. In terms of, again, we kind of addressed the spikes. So now it's just going to be consistent, which I think probably most people would prefer. But as the Blood Death Knight, I do, I have a love-hate relationship with the spike concept. The overall number of threats in an average pack of enemies has been reduced and more. And that to me is not true. I don't know why they would say that, to be honest. I like, we have had a lot of trash deaths on the PTR, and it's really hard for me to say why, because it seems pretty much normal to have these things happen. And it constantly seems like the healer is kind of just not really there. I guess it's harder than maybe even in the past on the healer. So the overall number of threats in an average pack of enemies doesn't make sense to me, because every mob is a threat. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what they mean by that. People are still dying to pretty much every pack. Like, there's never a pack where I'm like, well, that does absolutely nothing. It's almost not that case ever. So don't know what they mean by that. We also made improvements to rewards, and especially reducing the penalty of failing to finish a dungeon within the timer. So that was already done. Now, as we approach our second season, we have a chance to make some broader changes to the structure of Mythic Plus dungeon progression. And these are going to be the biggest changes that have ever happened from season to season. I don't think there's ever been anything bigger than this before. A factor that we see as an underlying cause of the many cited issues is the lack of smooth and healthy difficulty/reward progression in the current system. And rewards are an essential part of that picture. Okay. The introduction of delves has significantly changed the endgame reward ecosystem. And so now you're hearing it from them. There was a lot of people debating me on this topic. Like, it's not delves, it's X, right? The Blizzard just agreed that it is. I mean, I don't know how you could disagree. Especially now at this point, I don't think there's any way to disagree. But, like, it's pretty clearly delves. Like, I think it's pretty clearly delves here. And they're going to tell you why. All right, so let's keep reading. Players who are accustomed to doing Mythic Plus and past expansions may have geared up in delves at the start of the war within Season 1, and then looked at the Mythic Plus reward track and found few or no rewards worth their time below 7 level or so. That had 2 main effects, okay? Lots of players would enter the system at Mythic 7 since they didn't need champion gear, and Mythic 7 was the first level to drop hero track gear from each run. However, often these players frankly lack the dungeon experience required to succeed at that level. This is like, I laughed my ass off in the first video of this. This is so funny to hear Blizzard say that. However, some of you guys failed because you lacked the dungeon experience required. Oh, really? You mean you suck at the game? Like, it's actually kind of funny that they say that out loud. Because yes, obviously if you're failing a 7, like, it's because you're not skilled, right? Like, I call it skill, but like they're calling it experience. But I just think that's really funny how they say that. Anyway, dealing with a 77% bonus to enemy health and damage on top of Challenger's Peril and making deaths more costly, was never designed to be an environment in which to learn mechanics for the first time. And unfortunately, we got a big issue with the game because some people never learn mechanics properly. So whether they learn it the first time or the 10th time, it's not happening. So I don't know. I buy that, to be honest. Like, I mean, everybody should be getting better. But I see what their point is on it. It's like, you have an on-ramp. Like, they call it an on-ramp in the last post. Like, you're supposed to start small and build up. And that's just not happening. So instead, you're kind of starting in the middle of it. And that's not intended. Like, when they say it was never designed to be an environment in which to learn mechanics for the first time, it's literally true. But it's also kind of not, I don't want to say stupid, but it's like not a good idea to say that out loud, because even though it might not literally be true for the first time, it can still be true, because you may literally never see a mechanic in a state of its danger until a 7, right? Because that's kind of the problem here. Like, that's why they had to do the key squish in the first place. So I'm kind of unnerved by the fact that they don't recognize that. but it's probably just, you know, them speaking and not really thinking about it. Many players ended up doing just that, right? This heavily impacted success rates, led to a sense of inconsistency from group to group, and made many players more wary and more selective. And I think that that second part there is the biggest issue and what they need to solve. Inconsistency from group to group, huge. I mean, look at the runs, right? We have runs submitted to us where like these guys are frankly not going to ever upgrade. Like they have no chance. No chance. And I don't know how that can be physically possible. You know what I mean? Like if then you look at the keys that are ran by other players and it's like, well, they're just destroying the dungeons, you know? So I think that inconsistency is definitely the biggest issue. And again, I think this is mostly a problem with the player base, but you know, Blizzard makes the game. They're trying to, unfortunately, we're in a game being made now by a company that is only interested in putting out fires first and then designing content second. So don't forget, the system we got in season 1 was actually a direct, again, it was feedback. You know, this is what we asked for and this is what we got. It's always this monkey paw situation. And that's why I think a lot of these, you know, things that we're going to read here today are probably going to be in the same boat. But anyway, instead of just making the game the way they see fit and saying, like, you know, this is actually something that you could easily just say, like, hey, stop doing this. You guys want to keep getting farmed at the 7 range when you don't even know how the dungeons work? That's your problem. We have 2s for a reason, okay? Now, they do kind of circumvent that whole conversation in the next part, but it's still the answer to the question, okay? So they say, meanwhile, keys in the 2 to 6 range had a shallow applicant pool, especially past the first weeks of the season. And again, this is a purely PuG conversation. So it's very promising that they're talking about a purely PuG promising Papow situation. This meant that even players who tried to start at a lower difficulty level in order to build the experience to succeed also often had a hard time finding and forming groups, experiencing many of the same frustrations. I'm going to go ahead and dispute that one because we have been submitted a lot of keys, sub 6. But I mean, I guess it's probably true just by trends. Like I'm sure they're looking at a macro scale statistic here. There's probably far fewer keys in that range being done than there are in the higher range. But again, you're making a mistake doing this. Like this is not a problem with the game. It really isn't. I don't look at this as a problem with the game. If you're trying to skip to a 7 instantly because you feel like there's nothing for you sub 7, you're wrong. You're just not right. Like, unless you're already very skilled, like, you don't do that. Like, you don't do that. Even when I start alts, alts, good joke. Last time I did an alt was like 2020. But anyway, even when I do start, you start from the start. You start from the start. You got to start where your character starts. Like, you can't be skipping progression. This is a bad idea, no matter who you are. So anybody trying to do that is just setting themselves up for failure. And now, so this is Blizzard's point, is that they don't want to let people set themselves up for failure. So that's why they're addressing it. And I get it as a, you know, responsible parent here that Blizzard is. They don't want to see their kids walk into buses. You know what I mean? So I get it, why they would do it. But this is also bad for development because now it's potentially taking resources away from making the system better. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think we're focused on things that really are not problems. This is a problem with mentality. And again, we're listening to players who are just not trying to solve the problem themselves. Like for this to exist, it tells you that people are not playing the game right? Like, I mean, for there to be a shallow applicant pool when we're also saying that 7s are too hard for people, that doesn't even make sense. Like, what are they doing then? Like, how are they getting into the 7 in the first place? And if they're just failing 7s over and over again, then what? They just refuse to do a 6? Like, I don't understand. The two can't go together. So just got to get people to do it. Like, you have to play the game the right way. Anyway, so these are complaints, and now here's what they're going to do. Looking ahead to Season 2, our aim is to make the Mythic Dungeon system more rewarding from the outset and to smooth out the difficulty progression. And this is a good idea. Again, all this talk I'm saying, it's like, whatever. I wouldn't do it personally, but it's a smart choice on their part because it's going to make these go away. But unfortunately, it's going to probably just cause new, like, I mean, you know, people never are happy. So there's going to be some new problem. And I think this main reason why I'm recording the videos twice is because a lot of people haven't thought about what I'm about to read to you, including me. Baseline Mythic. Dungeons now award champion track gear from each boss, with a weekly instance lockout. The health and damage of enemies in those dungeons has increased to reflect the improved rewards, while keeping Mythic 0 at an accessible point for entry for players beginning their Season 2 gearing journey, and those looking to learn dungeons in a lower stakes environment, meaning there's no timer, right? So now this is a change. It was a daily lockout, I believe, and now it's a weekly lockout again. Okay. Mythic 2 through 10, each new level will now increase the health of damage by 7%, down from the previous 10. Per level scaling will remain at 10% from Mythic 11 and onwards. So immediately you have some thoughts on this, right? Like if you weren't hearing this conversation on the stream, you probably have some thoughts. And I'm going to tell you what I had my thoughts are after we're finished reading this, but just think about what that means to you. Xal'atath's bargain rotating effects will move up from 2 to 4, leaving no affixes other than the existence of a timer at the 2 entry levels of the system. That's crazy change on its own. But yeah, if you want to give, so now there's people say, I don't want affixes. There is actually no, like literally no affix on a 2 to a 4. I don't know who cares to do a 2 to a 4 for very long. But yeah, I don't think this is a good idea. Because then I think people are now going to start complaining about 5s having affixes. Like you're kind of damned if you do one way or the other. The alternating cycle of Tyrannical and Fortified will move up from 4 to replace the Challenger's Peril affix at 7, with the other one continuing to take effect at 10. So did we talk about that already? Yeah, so Challenger's Peril not going to exist at 7 anymore. They'll come to that right now actually. At 12, instead of an additional 10% increase to enemy health, Xal'atath Guile will now include the increased timer penalty for deaths that was formerly part of Challenger's Peril, as a replacement for the rotating bargain affixes. While the mechanic could feel overly punishing for groups still learning and progressing towards gear rewards, a focus on clean execution remains appropriate for the upper echelons of the system, and removing the extra 10% stats should make the transition into the prestige tiers of the system feel like less of a wall. So that's probably the most important point of the whole conversation. One, they're getting rid of Peril for low keys. So if all you do is farm for Vault, you will never see Peril. I think if all you do is farm for Vault, Peril did not really impact you, to be honest. But yeah, I'm sure it could for many groups. Now, the fact that it says this, I have no idea what this means. I try to rationalize it. I just am not able to think this way in terms of math. So if anybody wants to explain to me what this actually means, you're welcome to do it. But there's a chart here. Even that doesn't help me. But one way or the other, it sounds like the jump from 11 to 12 is way less. Like it's the same, seemingly, as the jump from 10 to 11, I guess, based on this. So the only real change from 11 to 12 is that you now have way less time, basically, if any deaths happen. But that doesn't say what happens from 13 onwards. So that part, it seems like it stays. But I don't know. You guys tell me if you know much about that, because this is a conversation that I struggled to have even on the stream. Anyway, the requirements to achieve some key reward tiers have been reduced. So this is not something that I normally care about. I don't think they should have done this. But again, I had a different opinion before I understood all of this, okay? So it says, on balance, this version of the system should have a more rewarding point of entry, smoother progression, partially because of the no affixes at the beginning, and overall lower difficulty than players experienced in Season 1. Okay, so by now, you should have an opinion on this. I imagine your opinion is that this should be easier, right? Okay, guess what you didn't think about, which I didn't think about either. If you thought about it, you're ahead of the curve. Baseline Mythic Zeros will now blah, 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 and health and damage will be increased. Okay? Guess what? We all missed it. I mean, I missed it the first time. So nerfing it to 7 down from 10 does not change anything. It's actually, I didn't do it. Trust me, I didn't do this. But somebody did the conversational math on the stream today. It's the same. So what they did is, on the PTR currently, everything has 25% more health in a 0. So we tested this. I looked at it in the stream if you want to go look at it. We looked at Operation Floodgate 0 this week. The mob had like 50-some million. And we looked at it the previous time it was testable. It had 40-some million. People somehow, I don't know, you're like a wizard. You can figure out that it did 25% health increase by going up that amount. So presumably that means the damage is also increased by that same amount. And then if you add all these numbers together, you will come to 10s having, I think the answer was it's slightly easier. Like not a lot easier. Like a little bit easier, but not a lot. And then we did 10s all day today, and I was like, they honestly don't feel easy. They honestly feel like harder at times. So I think I don't. So there's some conflicting conversations happening here by Blizzard, and that's why I'm confused by this. But it seems to me that they're saying they want it to be easier, but I think in reality it's just like getting to 10 will be easier. Not that all keys will be easier by a lot. It means that there's no affixes early, the gear is spread out better, the gilded stuff is starting earlier. So this should make progression easier, but numerically the dungeons are probably not different. I did not realize that that was a thing, and totally missed that on the first. Because what is the way it works is, yeah, you see base. This is an important number here, or stat, or whatever you would say. So 7% of the base. So they're actually kind of being a little misleading here, because they're telling you this as if it's a different change. Like to me, it feels like all of these are meant to be bullet point changes. Like we're doing this, we're also doing this, we're also doing this, we're also doing this separately. But in reality, this should be in this bullet point because they're the same thing. Like we're nerfing it, but because of the changes to 0, it's a net change. It's a net no change basically. And that's why this is this. Because the per level scaling will remain at 10% for Mythic 11 and onwards, because it's going to get like 7% plus this is going to equal the same number at 10, and then everything else stays the same going forward. Like they're actually making no change to the scaling. Do you understand? So it's actually very interesting that they would word it this way, because that really tricked me. It really tricked me the first time. Okay, but here's the big change. All right, and this is what the rest of the, this is a long video already. We're going to talk a lot about this here. I'm going to make a separate video on the implications that I believe will come from this. Okay. But let's read this. One additional note and of relevance to players at the upper end of the system, we are changing the rating requirement for the new Keystone Legend achievement being added in Season 2, moving it from 2850 to 3K. This is being done to keep it at a comparable level of challenge and prestige after the changes to the overall scaling. But from what we are seeing, there's not any actual changes to the overall scaling. I think keys above 12s are higher than they were in the past, but they're not higher than they were, or easier. They're not easier than they were last build, were they? I don't think so. We will also be decoupling this achievement from the system that allows players to set a floor for their high-level keystone. So if you're not aware, 2850 would be equivalent of having a couple 12s. It sounded like it should have been 4, but people were saying you could have easily gotten it to 3 if you just had a couple double upgrades on the 11s that you don't have 12s of. Which, you know, in the current season, that was a very easy thing to do. And so now it's going to make it so this has to happen. Once a player has finished all 8 seasonal dungeons within the timer, meaning they upgrade the key at that level 12, their keystone will no longer automatically de-level below 12. Once a player has timed all dungeons at 13, the new floor will be 13. So gigantic change. I mean, we're kind of glossing over this because we already talked about it a ton. But yes, this means that once you have summited a certain difficulty, your key can no longer go below that. And they say, and so on for all keys at or above 12. Which I'm glad that they're taking the time to clarify that. But yeah, before it was only 12. So if you did a 15, it couldn't go below 12. If you did a 14, it couldn't go below 12. Now, if you have all 14s, you can't go below 14. I'm going to make a whole new video on this topic because I think this is a whole video on its own. But I do not think this will work out in the favor that people think it will have. And I know a lot of people just want there to be no key depletions. This is not that. This is a very, very different situation. But it's definitely a step in the right direction. And I'm happy to see Blizzard try it. I think it will create new problems. And I will make a whole new video on that. So stay tuned probably this weekend. Once I have all my thoughts together, I may make that video. But yeah, anyway, I'll leave your thoughts. For now, I'd love to read your thoughts on this, on what you think this does for you and why you think this would be exciting. And if you don't like it, you know, say that too. But yeah, I think this is going to be another one of these things where we're getting a monkey's paw. I really do. And, you know, especially when you read some of this, it makes me wonder, like, is it intentionally misleading, or are we just in a bugged state on the PTR? Because it seems to me like they're saying, like, we want things to be easier. But when I look at it on the PTR, it's not easier. You would think it would have been substantially easier. I don't know what they mean by easy either. You know, like, is it just easier to get gear and is marginally easier because of that? I don't know. But from my experience testing today, This is a very, very, very big deal right here. And I did not think this through, and I did not expect this to be that big of a deal. So let me know what you guys are thinking. People have been already trying to crunch the math on this. If you guys have seen or have done it yourself, please send it to me. Leave a comment. I will definitely be taking a look at it. So thank you for watching. Stay tuned this weekend. We're going to have a lot of interesting videos. We'll see you guys in the next one.